Hello, everyone, and welcome to It's Not a Formula, It's a Conversation, Creating an Authentic Resume. This is the second of 4 webinars in our Professional Power Up series. I'm Becky Pacone, and my colleague Michelle Cavalcanti and I will be your hosts for today, and Michelle will be moderating the Q&A session after the presentation. We're very happy that you joined us today, and I'd like to now introduce Barbara Grossman and Jay Berger, the amazing duo who make up Headhunter on Tap. Hi, Barbara and Jay.
Hello, we are going to jump in quickly because we know that this is a long presentation. If you know us from the past, great. If you don't know us, we are career executive search professionals. We've had our own search firm for decades. Headhunter on Tap is our endeavor to share what we've learned about successful job search and a series of things that we know actually work.
Great, Jay. So let's dive in because this is going to be long. And if you have questions and don't have time today, please do join us on Friday.
And
we'll have plenty of time then.
And I think we're going to extend a little bit go over an hour to answer questions.
Over the hour.
Over the hour to answer questions after that. So let's go here.
Who am I anyway? Am I my resume? I love this lyric. I'm a big Broadway fan. Barbara's not so much a fan of Broadway. She kind of rolled her eyes when I suggested it. She relented about using it when I promised not to sing, so I'll spare you today. The next line is actually, that is a picture of a person I don't know, which is very apropos for today. We're very big on authenticity. You'll hear that throughout this presentation. We think the more authentic the resume, the more impactful it is when communicating both with a company and with individuals. We have a great deal of information to cover today, so we're going to come at you kind of hot and heavy, but you'll have this recording afterwards to go back with because we're probably going to be doing this quite rapidly. What we want you to take away from today's presentation is understanding the document should be a clear articulation of who you are and not just what you did. What you bring to the table is important, kind of what's next. You want it to be easy to read and understand so the person who is scanning it doesn't have to work that hard, gets the essence of what you're trying to communicate, and you want it to be long enough to communicate everything that's relevant. People are often asking about what's the ideal length of a resume. Barbara's going to cover it, and we'll cover it later in this recording. People are angst about writing their resume, probably because most people don't enjoy doing it. It's not so easy a task. One of the things to remember that might make it a little easier is there's no such thing as a perfect resume. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We like to say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and as much as you're making a best guess about who might be reading it, we're going to talk about that in a second, you never quite know. So there are certain conventions to follow, though, that'll make your resume probably better and more palatable to a larger group of people, and Barbara will be covering that in detail later on. One of the key things to remember, though, is your resume is a marketing document. You want it to reflect all of you, not just what you have done. You want it to be more descriptive of you as a person and not just a list of places you've been and roles that you've had. We kind of equate that to product sheets where they talk about what the product will do for you and how it will make your life easier, as opposed to the spec sheet, which tells you what batteries to put in and how much it weighs. It's also a living document. That means it can change. It can adapt. You may want to have several resumes geared towards different types of positions you are applying for or different industries. The things to remember when you write a resume are what do you want to convey, the material you have, what you have to work with, and to whom are you addressing this. And that can be not only a person, but an organization or an industry or what have you. So basically, it's about showing up in your resume. It's about putting you into the language. We'll talk a little bit about how to articulate that you and work it into profile summaries. It's talking about not what you've done, but how you've gone about doing it, and have your personality show up and have some fun in reflecting who you are as an individual along with what you bring to the organization. Let me talk a little bit about professional narrative, which we feel is incredibly important. It's kind of a core context to understand and leverage when conducting a job search. It was an outgrowth of several decades ago when I was sending a candidate in on an interview. The hiring company did have his resume, and when we send a resume, we always put a profile summary. basically my thoughts about this candidate and why they were appropriate for the position. I decided that day, let me read this. And I said to the candidate, let me let you know what this company thinks when they're sitting down with you, besides just seeing your resume. When I got done with reading the profile summary to the candidate, the response I got was, oh my God, you made me sound great. And I got very worried about that. I said, did I get anything wrong? I don't want to misrepresent you in any way or have you have to overcome any things that I said that were not accurate. And the person said to me, no, you got me more than I get me. And I came away kind of like, well, I'm actually excited about that and decided to make it part of what I did before sending candidates out on interviews. And subsequently, most people that I do that with say the same thing. In turning our attention to Headhunter on Tap, we decided to put down on paper, basically articulate what we had done intuitively in our search practices. And that's where this formula came into existence. Essentially, the professional narrative is made up of your core attributes, basically inherent traits that you leverage, your strengths, along with your journey, basically the experiences you've had in life that color it, and they ultimately will result in your professional narrative. Professional narrative can be a very valuable source or tool in ascertaining what positions you will excel at. If you find positions where you will excel and where the work comes easily to you because it leans into your core strengths or core attributes, not only will you be successful, but more often you will be happy. Perhaps the easiest way to articulate this, since it is probably a new concept to all of you, is to take you through the process with a real live candidate. Jake, we've changed the name to protect the innocent here, but we will take you through the process of working with Jake, looking at his resume when he walked in, and actually the remaking of Jake, not changing him in any way, shape, or form, but just repositioning how he would approach his job search, and it was effective in landing him in a new position. If you look at Jake Morgan's resume, it looks pretty good. He had director and senior director titles at Marriott. He was there for over a decade, maybe close to 20 years, with a stint as an entrepreneur between 2015 and 2019, where he decided to open a family fun center. When he came to us, he had gone back to Marriott after that venture failed and was a consultant who ultimately was let go during COVID. And when he came in, he said, I'm a hospitality guy, and I'm not sure how to transition, and I'm not sure how to find another job, and was feeling a little bit low. His industry was gone. And I want to take you through the process of how we opened up new avenues and opportunities for him. Before we go into core attributes for Jake, let's pull a lens back and talk about core attributes in general. I spoke earlier about professional narrative being a combination of your core attributes plus your journey. Well, your core attributes are traits, your strengths. Generally, they're the things that you use or bring to any encounter in life, both personally and professionally. It's how you go about taking on tasks at home. It's how you maintain relationships. It's how you interact with the world. And having an understanding of what those traits are, your attributes are, you'll have a better understanding and grounding in yourself. It stands to reason that when you take on tasks that play into your strengths, solving them will be much easier than when you take on tasks that don't play into your strengths. As a result, the work comes more easily to you. Not that you don't work less hard, but you have to exert less effort in doing something that you're not comfortable in doing because the work itself comes more easily to you. When the work comes more easily to you, you're more likely to be successful. And when you're successful, you're more likely to be happy. We see a lot of people who actually are in situations that don't play to their strengths and can be successful. But oftentimes what happens is they have to work so hard to overcome their lack of ability in those areas that by exerting that amount of effort, they come in and they say, look, I'm successful, but I hate what I do. A great football coach was asked why he was so good. And he said, I take the time to understand my players' strengths and weaknesses. and my job is to put them in situations where I know they will succeed. If you can articulate your core attributes, you can leverage that information to target careers or job situations that play to your strengths. It's important, though, to be truly authentic with yourself when you target and isolate what your core attributes are. The last thing you want to do is try to fool yourself or a potential employer and get into a situation that isn't one in which you will feel comfortable, happy, and excel. And let me throw one more thing into the mix. There's no such thing as a bad personal formula. People often come into us and they aspire to more glamorous traits like dynamic and creative, spontaneous, entrepreneurial, and sometimes they even will put that on their resume when it doesn't exist within themselves. And nothing could be worse. You don't want to end up in a situation where those are important things that are needed in a position if you don't have the wherewithal to be able to deliver on them. As I said before, even if you could overcome your deficiencies, you probably would be struggling and not happy in the role. But let's flip it on its head for a second, okay? There is no such thing as a bad dynamic formula. Some people look at dependable and methodical and logical and procedural, and they see that as somewhat boring. But I can tell you, when I'm in the back of an airplane and that plane's landing at JFK, I don't want the pilot to be creative or spontaneous and try to land the plane backwards. I want him to follow the systematic, methodical way you're supposed to land a plane every time. Let's get back to Jake. So Jake's core attributes, the ones we came up and developed with him, were systematic, energetic, intuitive, unflappable, collaborative, empathetic, analytical, positive, and a problem solver. These were certainly traits that he had demonstrated in the workplace before, yet were not necessarily hospitality traits. And by pulling back and not looking at him through a hospitality lens, we could begin to see him in a different vein. These traits also began to point in a different direction with a different set of titles and different roles for where he might go in the future. Now it's time to layer on Jake's journey to come up with his professional narrative. A journey is essentially your life experiences. They can be personal, it can be how you grew up, family constellation, influences of parents, single parent perhaps, whether you relocated a lot as a youth, whether you experienced tragedies earlier in life, unfortunately, but it also can be experiences outside the home, mentors, college experiences, and business experiences. Jake actually was quite fortunate to grow up in a fairly supportive, well, not fairly, a very supportive home. He had the benefit of going to college and getting a master's degree, and then went into business and had a quite successful run at Marriott. Starting his own business was a rewarding experience at first, but when he ran into some financial difficulties down the road and had to shut down that business, he had to take stock again and went back to what he knew, doing consulting work at Marriott, hoping a full-time job would come along. And then, with COVID, layoffs occurred, and actually the industry totally went away. He was faced at that point with, what do I do next? I have a family, I have responsibilities, and he was under quite a bit of financial hardship at that time. Taking these factors into account and actually looking at his core attributes as well as his business experience and his resume, we come to develop his professional narrative, which you'll see on the next slide. If you remember back to our description of professional narrative, we said it was a combination of core attributes plus your journey that ultimately will lead to articulating your professional narrative. We did Jake's core attributes, and they're in the small box on the left: systematic, energetic, unflappable, positive, a problem solver. And then we talked a little bit about his journey, one of rising, I call him a star, let's call him a star at Marriott, but a stumble with something that was entrepreneurial. What that leads us to is being able to articulate his professional narrative, which is something that we ultimately worked into his resume. If you look to the right, he was able to uncomplicate the complicated. He gets things done. He's talented at reading people and situations. He's got a natural ability to create buy-in and willing to take a risk. Plus, he showed some tremendous resiliency. You will see how by defining this, we were able to change the wording and approach to his resume to more reflect Jake outside of just being a hospitality guy, but painting a much broader picture. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this over to Barbara, who's going to take you through the nuts and bolts of creating a resume. And ultimately, we're going to put it and show you in practice with a finished copy of Jake's resume, combining what we just covered with regard to his professional narrative, plus using a lot of the information that you're going to get from Barbara with regard to the blocking and tackling of a resume construction.
Thank you, Jay. No doubt this looks familiar to all of you. We're going to approach the anatomy of a resume pretty much the way we typically read a resume, from the top straight on down. The sequence of these sections will apply for most of you. There will be some exceptions, but we'll address those at a later time. For now, we're just going to go in this order, which will be relevant for most everyone here. This is all pretty straightforward, but there are some questions that do come up. So clearly, the must-haves are a name, an email address, and a hyperlink to your LinkedIn profile. Next to your name, if you have a particular degree, if you're an attorney, if you're a licensed social worker, sometimes people include MBA. By all means, go ahead and indicate that right next to your name. The only time you would not want to do that is if the job for which you're applying is really not related to your degree or certification or licensing. You may want to just wait and include that later on under your licenses and certifications. It may be confusing to a reader to see that you're a clinical social worker if you're applying for a job, for instance, at a university in HR. You don't want to include anything that will create confusion. A word about your LinkedIn profile is to make sure that it syncs to your resume. This is really important and becoming even more so. So you want dates to match up, you want positions to align. It certainly doesn't have to be exactly the same as your resume. Some people actually just cut and paste their resume and put it into their LinkedIn profile. You don't have to do that. It can certainly be more spare, although we recommend that it be robust enough that you can be searchable based on it. But it's important because very often, or more often than you would imagine for sure, a LinkedIn profile is not only checked, but it's really used as the first touch, if you will. Oftentimes a resume is not even reviewed by a recruiter. And that is true for in-house recruiters, maybe even more than external recruiters, but both. So making sure that your LinkedIn profile syncs and is not outdated or does not confuse your resume is really critical. It is not necessary, but probably would be preferred if you would include a phone number. That's especially true for texting purposes. But on occasion, someone will want to call you rather than reach out to you through email, or they might want to text you. So it's great to have a phone number on there. People do exclude it. Again, privacy issues come up, but it would be best if you could include it. Optional are definitely physical address and website links. Most people, or many people, prefer to leave off their physical address because of privacy concerns. That's totally fine, and it's acceptable. During the pandemic, when so many people were in a different physical location temporarily than their permanent location, this became kind of the norm. It's really fine to do. The only time that it's useful, in my opinion, to include it is when you're actually relocating and all your prior work, maybe even your whole life, has been in one place or different places than where you're going to be or have relocated to. You want to make sure that people realize that you're not looking for a company to relocate you. It's also useful sometimes when you live in a place that might be like a significant suburb of a city. I'm thinking right now of Stamford, Connecticut, which is about an hour outside of New York, but it's certainly its own city, a small city, but it's its own place with its own industry. And there are companies that are north or west of Stamford that will be hiring people. And if they see that you live in Stamford, you would be a potential candidate, especially if they need you to be on site at least sometimes. Whereas if you live, for instance, in Jersey City or Brooklyn, it would be next to impossible to do that commute. So a physical address can be helpful there. A website link is important for people in certain professions. Graphic artists immediately come to mind. Many computer engineers, software engineers include a link to their coding work or some of their other work. And there are other examples. People in communications may include links to some of the press they've received or media attributes that they've received. So there are times when website links are really important, or hyperlinks. If you have a personal website, maybe it's a hobby that you have or something you're truly passionate about, but it really doesn't relate to your career at all, sometimes it's best to err on the side of omission. Then again, sometimes it's fun and great to include, and it can be very relatable. That's a case-by-case basis. We believe strongly that for all people, a profile summary is useful, regardless of whether you're a recent college graduate or someone 30 years into your career. This section of a resume allows you to convey information that you really can't convey elsewhere in a resume. There are 4 parts to a profile summary. They're not necessarily distinguished graphically, but parts that you might want to include, or sometimes not all of them, just some. So the first piece everyone will have, and that's the summary piece. It's where you really get to provide that context for the reader, as well as distinguish yourself from other people. In large part, when we're crafting resumes for people, we base what goes into this section on what comes out of the work we do with regard to your professional narrative. It's not verbatim, of course, but it informs the way we structure the summary. It's controversial to use an objective statement. There are some professionals who say it's not a good idea, and others of us think that it can be helpful, particularly for recent college graduates or someone who's in a career transition. Putting in an objective about where you want to go is helpful. Otherwise, sometimes it's a puzzlement to the people reading your resume. Why is this person applying for this role? It doesn't match anything they've done. Another piece that we often include, whether it's in the form of key competencies or skills, are to just bullet point areas that you want to highlight in terms of your core areas of expertise, or if you're, for instance, in technology, your core skill set. You might have both of these, you might have just one, you might not have any, but it can be helpful and can be used to highlight areas of your experience that may not stand out quite enough on their own. I'm going to digress here for a couple of slides and pull the lens back to provide a high-level view of some best practices when it comes to writing resumes. Many of you will have more than one version of your resume, be focused on one area of your expertise or another in different positions you're applying for. It's important to make sure that your resume is really targeted towards the specific role for which you're applying. People often will ask us if it's okay to use a template, and the answer is absolutely. Please keep your use of templates to simple templates. For one thing, algorithms cannot read complicated templates, and it usually will mean that your resume will not be considered. And also, personal preference for both Jay and myself is we prefer to see a resume that is not overcrowded or overly complicated. So when you use a template, make sure to use one that allows for some white space on that piece of paper. And that leads us right into a conversation about density versus length. It's not uncommon for people to cram 2 pages worth of information onto 1 page because they're under the impression that a resume can't be longer than a page. That is just not true. You can have a resume that is as long as it needs to be. Conventional wisdom amongst professionals is that there's no real length that a resume must be limited to, but we all know when we're reading one that's too long. Generally speaking, we try to keep it to 2, no more than 3 pages. There are exceptions. If you're a college graduate, a recent grad, for the most part, while there are some exceptions, your resume should not be more than 1 page. That's not a hard and fast rule. It's just generally speaking. What you don't want to do is crowd your resume onto a page so that it's hard for the person who's reading it to read it. For people like Jay and me, we could maybe read 100 or more resumes even in a day. The easier on the eyes, honestly, the better for us. And that's true for most people. Something that we call functional titles, which will get its own slide in just a moment, is something worth considering when you're looking at how to describe the work you've done. There are some pitfalls to avoid. Don't use graphics other than maybe lines or shading to separate sections. Absolutely under no circumstances do I want to see an emoji on a resume. Keep your fonts simple as well, easy to read and clear. Don't get too scripty or cute, and keep color to a minimum. I usually advise people against using any color other than, neutral shades of blue or gray. And finally, proofread your resume and then have someone besides yourself proofread it. We do know people in HR who, if there is so much as one typo in the resume, they just won't consider that resume. I think that's a little extreme myself, but it is important to know that that's going on out there and make sure your resume just doesn't have anything in it that doesn't belong there. And then remember to always send it out as a PDF so that the formatting doesn't get jumbled. Before we move on, I just want to point out that although these pitfalls apply to most people, there are absolutely exceptions. If you're a graphic artist, if you are in a particular field that, like advertising, where portfolios and color and design are really important, you may well be using interesting graphics, different color palettes, even more complex and different fonts. Not sure about emojis under any circumstances, to tell you the truth, but I'm sure there's probably even an exception there. Just for most of you, in general, this will apply. But if you are in one of those types of professions or lines of work where you know that how you visually represent yourself in a resume is key and important, by all means, do what you need to do. Starting with keywords, let's talk about some of the things to make sure to include in your resume with regard to language. Keywords are a necessary evil. As long as there are applicant tracking systems and algorithms, you're going to need to incorporate them into your resume. One of the best ways to do that is to look at a position description and see what language is in there, and then take those words and scatter them throughout your resume. I like to say that actions speak louder than words. Rather than using a lot of adjectives, I try to encourage people to use nouns and verbs to describe their accomplishments or the work they've done. Obviously, some adjectives are important, but you want less fluff and more substance. People are in love with metrics. We live in an age of measurement and more measurement. My feeling about this is measurement, as long as it describes impact, is really relevant. Whether it's qualitative or quantitative, it doesn't matter, but be sure to use metrics in a way that are really conveying something that has occurred and that is in context. Sometimes I read through someone's resume and there's all these numbers and percentiles, and they're really kind of without context. I don't know what they're trying to tell me. So make sure when you're using metrics that you're incorporating them within a bigger story, if you will. The next topic to really speak about is one that's going to be politically incorrect. But since I've seen it so many times and across generations, I feel like it warrants mentioning. Women have a tendency to use language that is very collaborative. We typically don't take ownership for our work, and this is a bit of a pitfall. Men do this too, but to a lesser degree. For women, it is just very, very common. The truth is that in the workplace, taking ownership is not a function of being aggressive or egocentric. It's being accountable, and it's important. And when you're talking about the work you've done, don't hesitate to use words like led a team or led an initiative. Even if there were other people who worked on it with you, you don't always have to say that you collaborated on something. Sometimes that's appropriate, but it's not always appropriate. Finally, use of the third person is general protocol. It is very seldom the case that writing something in the first person is effective or warranted. By and large, your resume should be written in the third person. Don't write it as if somebody else is writing about you, but just describe yourself coming from the third person. This is a topic that seems to push everyone's buttons, and it's completely understandable. In the world of job search and online applications, we're all kind of swimming against the tide when it comes to algorithms. The truth is, we don't know exactly what the algorithms are looking for in any one situation, so you're not going to be able to beat them. We often get the question of, how do I beat the algorithm? I don't know. The answer is nobody knows. So don't even try. But what you can do is understand how they work. So all of the applicant tracking systems, when you go to an application portal and submit your application, have some algorithm functioning. Generally, it's based on simply keywords. In some instances, there's some quote-unquote AI. There's some machine learning going on that's looking for number of times a word appears, where it appears in your resume, how early on it appears, in what context. But that is more the exception than the norm. Typically, it's a matter of keywords. So as I mentioned before, you can look at keywords that are in a position description and try to incorporate those into your resume. If you're not quite sure where you're headed, but you're just trying to get your resume in order, you can work backwards. Look at position descriptions that really jump off the page to you. Positions that look like ideal jobs or dream jobs, and use those as your guide. And that will help you to get some keywords into your resume. After that, stop thinking about it. Getting back to the business at hand and working our way through the resume, the next section that we're going to discuss is professional experience. Typically, this is usually where the meat of your resume is going to be. Basically, resumes come in 3 flavors: chronological, functional, or combined. The chronological format is the one that most of you are used to seeing and probably have used most often. It's the one first and work your way backwards from there. A functional resume is particularly useful for people who are in a career transition, but sometimes you'll want to use one even if that's not the case. And it's a resume where you're organizing your experience based on your skill sets, hence functional, right? So what have you done throughout your career that can be easily identified in categories, and you present your experience in that way. A combined resume is exactly what it says. It uses both chronology and function to convey your experience. All of these can be found online if you just Google examples of them, and you can follow those templates. There are some frequently asked questions that come up pretty much all the time. I'm sure the one we get the most often is, how far back should I go? And our rule of thumb is to pretty much go back about 20 years and not necessary to go back further. For the most part, the jobs you had earlier in your career won't directly relate to the job you want to be doing going forward. Even if it's in the same area, it may not be vastly different. It just doesn't have a lot of applicability. And there is a reality about ageism, so there's no need to include something that might work against you. That leads us directly to which positions to include. And the reality is that it's important to include those positions that will be most helpful and relevant to letting the reader know why you are going to be appropriate for the position you're applying for. So if there's a job, for instance, very early in your career that has some real meaning or significance for the work you're going to be doing, by all means include it. Sometimes people have worked for very small companies for the most part, but they had one really well-known and leader in their profession early on, and they want to include that work. Go ahead and include that position, but then you run into the situation of, don't leave off other positions that come afterwards because then it looks like a big gap. So you need to be sensitive to how to best structure those positions if you're going to include them from earlier in your career. Sometimes we divide work up into different categories. So if you've been a project manager and a data scientist and your jobs have gone back and forth between the two, we might identify them differently and then put them in different chronology. The whole idea is to make sure to include the positions that are most important and to manage the gaps. And that takes us right into a very commonly asked question, which is, what do I do about a gap? More people than you think probably have some gaps in their career at this point in time. The pandemic created a lot of career gaps. People take time off to care for a young family. They take time off to care for a family member who's ill. They take time off to care for older family members. People take time off to care for a deceased parent's estate, for instance. Families live far apart from each other now. The world has changed dramatically over the last several decades, and needing to take time off is just not all that unusual. Some companies even allow employees to take sabbaticals from their work. I know someone who was considering taking a sabbatical from a large international bank, which allowed for up to a year to do that. And she was going to go study, I think, cooking in Paris. She would want to account for that and should. So it's acceptable and it's really a good idea. I will get to a slide in just a couple of minutes about how you can structure that within your resume, because then the next question that comes up is, how do I indicate a gap? Just a final note for anyone who's early on in their career or a recent graduate, if you worked in a work-study program or worked at positions because you were self-funding your education or part of it, and therefore were unable to have the time and luxury of having the types of internships you would have preferred to have, especially those that might have been unpaid, by all means indicate on your resume that that experience was in order to fund your education. That is well respected and well regarded, and it goes a long way to explain the lack of internships that would be more relevant to the work you're doing. A couple of slides before, we were talking about the mechanics of a resume, and I mentioned a functional title. We encourage you to use them on your resume. There's a little caveat here, which is to say that when you're actually filling out a job application for a company or an organization, make sure to use your actual title. But on your resume, which is really as much a marketing document as it is a document to convey your experience, sometimes a functional title is much more useful and is really preferred. This is true particularly when a title is either obscure or is sort of unclear. For example, we worked with a nonprofit client where instead of using the title grant manager, which is more typically used in that profession, they used the title program officer. No one ever would really know what that means. So when people leave that organization, when they want to convey the work they did for them, they're probably better off to use grant manager. Another type of example, and this is someone we actually worked with, who was a vice president of IT, but for a very small company. It was himself, his CIO or CTO, and one junior person who was reporting to him. He was not an enterprise IT VP. So in applying to larger enterprises and big companies, we advised him to use the title Senior Systems Engineer. Similarly, we worked with a client who used the title Trade Development Manager for a position that was really a brand management position. When we were searching for candidates, we needed to use the word brand manager to find candidates who would be appropriate. So if I was writing that candidate's resume who was leaving that company, I would change trade development manager to brand manager. And this just makes your resume clearer to the reader. You're not trying to deceive anyone. And many, many places have really obscure or unclear titles. So don't hesitate to change them for purposes of your resume and to make it more clear. A couple of slides ago, I mentioned that one of the most frequent questions we receive is how to account for gaps or whether or not to do so. And our feeling is that it's not just okay to account for them, but it's really a good idea. We are human beings and we're wired up to fill in the blanks. And because of the way we're wired up to fill in the blanks, we usually fill blanks in with negative thoughts or information, completely unsubstantiated, but that's what we do. And regardless of why you've been on sabbatical, it's a good idea to account for the time. These next couple of examples are taken from actual resumes that we've done with people. I just want to note that in the actual resume, this would be all black type. For purposes of this slide, I've used blue and red to highlight the information so that you can see it more readily. But on your own resume, I would not use color to denote this. The first example of how to account for a gap is shown here in red. This is an individual that I worked with who was hired by McKinsey in March of 2022 when they were on a huge hiring streak. Unfortunately, in March of 2023, they decided that they needed to reduce their workforce, and she was part of a large layoff due to internal restructuring that included much of her team. We simply stated that on her resume. It's a very straightforward example of how this can be done. This next example is a little less straightforward, and that's precisely why I've included it, because sometimes situations are a little complicated and you try to simplify them. This was someone who came to me when she was laid off from a position she had not actually even started. She was hired for a contract role with Google. It was an excellent opportunity to work in a newly formed area where she was going to be recruiting leadership teams at a very high level. It was a great opportunity. She accepted a contractual position, even though she had been in a permanent role and really wanted a permanent role, but it was too good to pass up. Unfortunately, it was when the pandemic hit. Google made the decision that they were going to rescind all offers made for contract positions. And so before this person even started her job, she was out of a job. She had already resigned from her previous position, so there was going to be a gap on her resume. It's indicated here in red how we explained it. And what we decided to do was add a link, a hyperlink to an article that appeared in the New York Times explaining what Google had done in order to give the rationale in the situation even more credibility. This is a situation that was just not so straightforward, which is why I've included it. These things happen, and there are perfectly reasonable explanations. You just have to be able to explain them, and best to do it right in your resume whenever possible. We're going to wrap all of this up. I know it's been a lot, with these next 4 sections: education, certification and licenses, skills summary, and a personal section. And I'm going to do this very quickly. Most of this is information you can readily find online. For most of you, you are going to list your most recent degree first. You should definitely list all of your degrees. You may drop those dates anytime you would like to do that. You can include your major or majors. It's not necessary, but you certainly can, particularly, again, if it's relevant. You're going to hear us say that over and over again throughout our webinars. What's relevant should go in. What's not relevant should come out. Once you've really gone beyond, your first position, you're most likely going to exclude most of your courses and just about anything else unless it's particularly and specifically relevant to the job you're applying for. In our opinion, you've worked hard for these and they should be included. Include any professional accreditations that you have, any courses with certifications that you've taken, and any licenses that you hold. Sometimes you're not going to want to include certifications and licenses or degrees at the top of your resume because it may cause some confusion. But in those cases, you can certainly include them and should in this section. That's what it's here for. It's perfectly okay to list absolutely all the skills that you have. It goes without saying probably that you want to list your technical skills. I have an asterisk here that these may be listed in a profile summary depending on the type of work you do. I always recommend listing any foreign languages that you have proficiency in, whether it's highly proficient or conversational. It doesn't really matter, but you never know when it might be helpful. And oftentimes it's not mentioned in a position description, but yet someone might say, oh, that would be really great, or sees it on a resume and said, that's really terrific. Anything that you have that's industry specific, by all means, go ahead and list. A lot of times another company or organization may use something else, but they know that if you know one tool, you're going to be able to easily learn the one that they use. So by all means, go ahead and list them. We're going to wrap up the anatomy of a resume with this last category. We advocate for including it as long as whatever you're including is authentically you and not just filler. By all means, go ahead and include these aspects of your life, whether they're board positions or professional memberships, community service, personal interests, or volunteer and leadership positions. And that is that. Jay, would you like to just wrap up this webinar for us?
Thanks, Barbara. And I really appreciate I have a great partner. Barbara is lovely because she leaves to me this last piece of wrapping things up, which is, to me, the most fun. Because this is when we get to show you what we've been trying to communicate through this entire webinar. All the pieces coming together with the before and after. And hopefully, when you see the after, it'll be a little bit like cooking shows, when the person tastes something at the very end and goes, wow, that's really good. So let's see. Hopefully I'll get an ooh and ah out of you. Jake, we're back to Jake. I just want to remind you of Jake, get you back to the before. Marriott, we talked to him about Marriott, Monkey Joe's before. Nice resume, competent resume. But we're going to go now to the next slide, which is Jake's professional narrative. As a reminder, his core attributes are on the left: systematic, energetic, intuitive, unflappable, collaborative, etc. His professional narrative uncomplicates the complicated, talented at reading people, getting things done. You can read through these, resiliency. And I will show you how we integrated that into the resume and used all of the various tools that Barbara had outlined to put together a more effective product. So if you remember, what we were trying to do with Jake's resume is have it lean less on his hospitality experience and more on where he wanted to go. We talked with him through his role at the company, and we came up with a title or a direction of program management and operations leader, a descriptive title of where he wanted to go. The professional summary on the top is an overview. It's an overview of how he approaches what he does, his skill set, and some of the things that came through in his professional narrative. We wanted to make it basically idiot-proof. Barbara hates when I use that expression, but the goal here is to have somebody read the top. Barbara talks about creating a context for the resume. That is exactly true. We want somebody to read the top and have a very good indication of who Jake is as a professional and not even need to read the rest of the resume. The rest of the resume just validates what they see on the top and talks about his strengths. You'll see in that professional summary not exactly the language that we may have pulled out with regard to his core attributes or his professional narrative, but it alludes to a lot of the same skills. And when we talk about being able to navigate highly matrix complex organizations, that deals with how he is able to bring people together and is persuasive and can build teams. So it doesn't have to be a direct correlation, but you want to address the overview of what a professional narrative is and get it across in the top. The hope with a resume is that if somebody who knows Jake reads the top, they say, yeah, that's definitely you. Not just what he did, but who he is as a person and how he goes about doing things. You'll also see what we did with Marriott since that was predominantly the bulk of his career, we took the dates there and put it all on the top. And rather than have it chronological through the whole resume and break down where he was doing what where, we thought it better to just put his dates on top to show his progression within the firm, and then break out what we wanted to emphasize as far as his core skills that he could bring to a new environment. And amongst them are his program project management experience, his internal consulting and business process engineering, the fact that he had worked in operations, that he had a very, very broad skill set. Having used a professional summary on the top to outline basically a lot of his business skills, strategic planning and implementation, solutions development, delivery, stakeholder relationship management, cross-functional team leadership, we didn't feel a need to basically go into his responsibilities in each one of these roles. So it made it a lot easier for us to use key accomplishments. And key accomplishments, we always like to incorporate key accomplishments into resumes because they show that an individual can get things done. It's the things one is most proud of and shows the impact that one can have or you can have on an organization. Sometimes when we're building resumes and we talk about somebody's role, a senior director, we will describe some of their responsibilities, but then we also will put in key accomplishments. In the case of Jake, we had enough key accomplishments that we could highlight that to make him a very, very effective person to have on one's staff. We did not want to forget about Monkey Joe's. We did not want to hide that. We kind of hid it a little bit because somebody looking at the Marriott experience might see that there was a gap between 2015 and 2019. Generally not enough to disrupt somebody from continuing to go through the resume, and most often probably somebody wouldn't even spot that. But even if they did, they'd go through all of the key accomplishments at Marriott, and then they come to Entrepreneurial Venture, Family Entertainment Center, which now becomes a little bit more palatable to somebody saying, oh, he left for a while, tried something, it didn't work out, and he got hired back. So it proves he was a valued employee there. At this point, the reader is, for the most part, sold on his background, and hopefully we'll bring him in for an interview. You'll also notice that it covers most of the other things that Barbara had mentioned before. It is clear, it's easily read by whoever is reviewing it. It has the contact information on the top, covers education, covers certifications, technology, and awards, and the link covers everything that we wanted to cover with what we think is nothing extraneous. We didn't put anything in here that didn't have a purpose. As mentioned earlier, this resume was effective. Jake ended up getting hired by a global biotech company that was working on a global initiative, and they need somebody in a program project management role to build teams, put them in place, and successfully implement a solution that was going to be rolled out throughout their organization. Certainly a far cry from hospitality, and in a great space moving forward. Looking at Jacob's after resume, I think it's safe to say it was a clear articulation of who he is, not just things he's done, but his approach to how he goes about doing things. And also spoke volumes about what he would bring to the table moving forward. The resume, hopefully, was easy to read and understand. And as I mentioned just before, long enough to communicate everything that was relevant. And obviously it was effective.
All right, Jay and Barbara, we invite you to put your camera back on and we'll get right into the Q&A. We realize that we have only about 5 minutes left, but we are going to extend the Q&A until about 1:15 today. It will be recorded, so for people who have to go back to work or have other obligations, just know that I'll try to get to as many questions as I can that you've sent in. And also just to make sure that everybody remembers, we have a job talk on this topic this Friday, starting at noon to 1 again. That's Eastern Standard Time. We do not record those sessions. So we do hope that you are able to come and ask your specific questions. Barbara and Jay get into a back and forth with you and really ask a lot of follow-up questions to get to the very complete answer that they generally give to our participants. So I'm going to get right into it and not say too much more. There are some very short questions, I'm sure, and then some other longer ones. So I'm going to start with this one. What is the difference between a summary and an objective?
So an objective is is saying what it is you want to do specifically. Maybe you've been a project manager and a data scientist, for example, and you want to go into a pure data scientist role. Your objective is going to say something to that effect. The summary is really your professional narrative. It's your core attributes with your journey articulated in a way that describes who you are and what you've done, to provide the context for your experience that follows.
Yeah, and more often than not, an objective is more important when you're doing something a little bit more radically different than what you normally have done. If you're just looking for something, you're a senior contributor and you're looking for a managerial role and you're applying for a managerial role, you don't necessarily have to say, I'm looking for a managerial role. It can be, or you might want to, though, in your summary, profile summary, talk about leadership, talk about some of the things that would lead you to feel that you're competent for that next step.
Thank you. Next one, how do you utilize functional titles while syncing your resume to your LinkedIn profile?
Good question.
Go the same way. You use the functional titles on your LinkedIn
profile.
resume.
Right.
What happens is, I mean, people say, well, this is my official title. Yeah, but your official title does not denote, or for somebody else, what you really do. So it's doing not only a disservice for yourself, but it's doing a disservice for the person who's reviewing your background.
You don't want to
Because
disqualify yourself.
you're actually misleading them to a certain extent.
Well, you don't
not
want to
intentionally.
disqualify yourself for things based on your title. So yeah, your LinkedIn profile can sync with your resume. Place you need to use your actual title is on a job application, and that's because of background checks.
And also, what if your job title is at a different level than like at your current company than the one you're applying for? So senior scientist, scientist 2, does that matter regarding the functional title, you know?
Yes, it's a little like the VP of IT. VP of IT, but that wasn't an appropriate description of him because he really was a senior systems engineer working there. You don't want, and senior scientist 2
Doesn't
means
help,
nothing
right.
to most people unless you're within that organization.
Mhm.
So for the most part, what are you? Are you a scientist? Are you a senior scientist? Are you a lead scientist?
Right.
Go with something that's a little bit more descriptive.
Thank you. How many core attributes do you recommend? 7, or is it 7 plus or minus 5 kind of thing?
How many
And
you
then
have?
also, do you have a list of attributes that you're willing to share with the group? Not now, but
The answer is there's no set number. And no, we don't have a list because it's very individual and very personal. So what works for some people, the idea is to really be incredibly authentic and avoid using the labels that we all tend to use. So
What I say is people rely on business speak labels, and more often than not, these are not business speak labels, they're human labels. And that's where we want to get to. So sometimes we'll dismantle when somebody says they're detail oriented. We say, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm precise. Oh, okay. Precise is a little bit different descriptor than being detail oriented, which sounds, that's what every project manager says, I'm detail oriented. So there are ways of playing around with the language that's more creative and in a lot of ways much more descriptive, and set you apart from all of a sudden you stand out a little bit from those other people who are more cookie cutter.
right.
thank you. Here's one about, I was wondering what they think about including a professional headshot on their resume. Barbara mentioned no graphics, but I have seen headshots on some resume templates lately. They do have one. They're saying that they think it's helpful to have a face to the name, and it may help you stand out, making it more personal, but they want to know what you think.
We think differently, I think, right? Go ahead. What would
I'm
you
a
say?
fan.
Yeah, I don't mind it.
And Jay likes it.
So beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, obviously what you want to do is you want to have a good shot. You want it to be professional looking. You want it, in some regards, with a headshot, you don't want it to stand out so much, meaning you don't want it to be posed like you're a model or whatever. But
It also depends on your field. So it's extremely common for them to be used in social media positions, anything in social media, typically that's sort of the industry norm. You kind of want to feel out your industry. My feeling is you should always have a photo of yourself on your LinkedIn profile. That's like a must-have.
Definitely.
Mhm.
And I prefer to see your LinkedIn I prefer to see it there. The other thing is Jay doesn't actually do the writing of the resumes. I do. They take up room.
That's what I was saying, real estate. Barbara's very big on real
Real
estate,
estate on a resume.
Right.
value of real estate. So if you have space, great. If you have to sacrifice something for it,
Yeah.
Thank you. Another one. What is the cleanest way to show promotions within one organization?
Put all
Good
your
one.
jobs within that organization under one heading. Don't itemize the company and a lot of times I see people separate them out, like
we did it with
Bank of
Jake.
America.
We did it with Jake.
with Jake. We only listed Marriott once and then we put all his jobs under Marriott. A lot of times people put the company and the job, and same thing on LinkedIn profiles. They list them separately, not a good way to show. It's better to list them all under one thing so you can see the progression.
And one other thing, when you have career progression and over the course of 8 years or 6 years or whatever, and you started someplace and what you were doing in the beginning is you were doing data entry and making sure that data was accurate. Nobody cares when you're at a managerial level that you did that. So that becomes like unnecessary to repeat. A lot of people repeat what they did 10 years ago,
Right.
where it's not relevant to the role that they have right now because it's not part of the product, the description. You can use it if you think that you have to lay the foundation for where you are. But if it's a given that that's where you started,
Yeah.
don't waste the time. Don't waste the real estate.
Follow up to that one. So if you are from a company that may not may not be as well known as a Marriott, what do you think about adding very brief explanation of the company? Like, for example, if it's like ECRI that they put in parentheses, Patient Safety Organization.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we did not say this, but that's this
That's
style.
something I will add for next year. That's
Yes,
a great
gonna put
point.
that. Good point. What we generally will do is we'll put the name of a company, and after if it's a big company, we will put where you are in that company. If it is a Marriott, we'll put a little descriptor of what part of Marriott you're in, or Boeing what you're in. But if it's a company that people do not know, I'm working with a company called US Fertility right now, which has 3,000 people around the country. I would put underneath US Fertility a description of what they are, so you set the context as well as maybe even a link to the site. So
A related,
good point.
a
And
related-
then title and then description of what you've done.
A related comment about that is if your company has been acquired, also put the name of the acquired company. So if you've worked for a company that's had 3 different names because it's been acquired 3 times, I would list those all under one thing, but just keep changing put the accurate name before your title, just say acquired by in parentheses. So same
So it
idea.
shows the continuity of being within one organization. It's actually 3 organizations, but it just
You didn't
it's all
change
listed
jobs, the
under
company changed.
the
Right.
same I guess dates of employment from 2015 to 2023, and you work for, and you can put all 3 names of companies,
Right,
and then break it down into what the tenure was underneath them.
exactly.
Thank you. Quick one. What contact information should you include if you're applying to an internal position? Like, is it the same? Would you do anything differently or just the same?
Well,
Okay.
I mean, what's important?
Yeah.
Meaning if location is, if it's internal, but it's in a different location, I mean, that's where you want to put where you might be living or where you're open to relocation and such. But other than that, your email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is about if you have a lot of experience, how do you condense all of that experience into a resume? What's the best format in this case?
Do you want to take it? Should I? Go ahead.
You probably don't need to include all of it on your resume. So for some people, editing is the hardest part of writing their resume. And oftentimes people with a lot of different experience or a lot of longevity at this point in their career have difficulty figuring out what to include and what not to include. You don't really need to get into the weeds about some things that you did earlier in your career if they're not extremely relevant to what you want to be doing next.
Yeah, we go back to the basics. What do you want to communicate and to whom? And so what you want to do is you want your resume to be 80% about what you're heading towards rather than what
The
where you've
80-20
been.
rule.
In a lot of cases, if somebody started in consumer products and then went from a consumer products company to a data analytics company that was whatever, measuring performance of things, they might say, talk about the 10 years that they're doing data analytics, and in the previous 20 years, they might say prior to, you could say a career, consumer products holding such and such positions. You don't even have to describe what you did. You just, Colgate Palmolive from blah, 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 blah.
I actually usually I create two categories for people like that. I create a relevant work experience category, and then another category that says early career or earlier career. And then I just, in that section, I just list the jobs and the dates and the titles.
And remember to do multiple resumes. So don't,
Right.
some people say, well, I want a resume and I want it to use it for everything. Problem then is then it can become
Very hard to figure out what
get
this person
and
does.
there's too much in there. So it's like, okay, here I want to focus in this direction. So I'll downplay these roles. Here I want to focus in that direction. So pick and choose.
Yeah, I mean, we can follow up a little bit more on
Yeah.
that on Friday in more detail, because that's.
That
a
sounds
really-
good. I think we'll probably get some people with some more specific questions. Here's another one. When converting a scientific academic CV to a resume, and quantifying accomplishments, how can you translate the significance of academic specific accomplishments into something meaningful for non-academic positions? They gave an example, for example, publishing 4 first author papers within a year for a position that probably isn't familiar with first authorship.
Well, explain what first authorship, no.
Friday, Jay.
Yeah, no. What's the, what first authorship, is that creating something new? Is that bringing something, I'm
I know,
rhetorically
but-
asking this question. If it's creating something out of new that didn't exist before, that's how you can measure it. Uncovering things, depending.
Well, how about just the question about, I mean, we can get into more specifics maybe on Friday, but maybe just how do you convert CV? Just generally, how would you convert like some significant things from an academic into a
You have to
more,
think about what about it is relevant in industry.
Yeah.
So if you've written 15 novels, right, and that's really got nothing to do with the job you're applying for, you can have it in there somewhere, but you don't need to waste a lot of time or space talking about that. Yes, it's an accomplishment, but it's not specific to the job you want to do.
Right.
A lot of people get very stuck on what they've done being sort of very important, but it's not always important for what you want to do. So you have to really think hard
Right.
about the experience you've had that you're thinking about converting and why that would be useful for somebody to know.
Like novels, if you writing of the novel, maybe the great accomplishment that you're proud of, but you had to navigate publishers, you had to win over publishers to convince them to produce this. You got involved in how to market it. That may be the transitional skills of transferable skills that you'll bring to the new job. The other thing is, in most cases with CVs, people don't care about all of the publications that because they all they sound very similar. The fact that you're prolific is great, okay, but that may not be what somebody's looking for when they hire you. And another key to shortening it is you can always add an addendum. So
Right.
have that first page be descriptive of where you want to go, what's important for
okay.
the hiring person to know, and then just put an addendum. So if you
With all
want
of
to
your-
include all that, so they don't have to wade through it.
Okay, another one, if you are downshifting in your career from management to individual contributor, should you include your directorial responsibilities in your resume or downplay those in a way? I think this speaks to not wanting to seem like you're overqualified, that kind of question.
This is where your summary, your profile summary on the top can address that a little bit, where this is where objective can come in. seeking to be, you know, after, strong, you can put that you had managerial responsibilities, but now seeking an individual contributor role where I can have a direct impact on exact blah, 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 blah. So,
And when you're actually describing your positions and your experience, if you were the director of IT, let's say, and you led a team of 5, I'm going to assume it's a smallish team, you certainly probably should include that, but rather than focus on what you did in that role as a director, you want to focus on the work your team produced. So here's the impact we have. You want to reframe your position to talk more about the contributions and the impact.
and there are different reasons for why you want to downsize. So some people say, I just don't want that headache anymore and I want to be an individual contributor. Some people say I'm at a point in my career where I want to get off that. I mean, the context also will affect how you approach wording your resume and how you target the going forward.
By the way, just a word about this, in large technology companies now, the Metas and the Googles, they're very fluid about being an individual contributor and a manager. People go into managerial roles and then go out. And they start off, and it's not as easy to go from an IC to a manager. That takes a little more work. But if you've been a manager and you just want to go back to being an IC, that's really very acceptable, and it's not frowned upon. I think there's an I mean, I know the reason for it. A lot of the private sectors, non-tech, are not as used to it or familiar with it. But shifting from IC to management is not atypical.
And on your resume, you want to show that you are still hands-on and involved in the day-to-day activity and can do that role, as opposed to just listing all your selected accomplishments or all managerial leadership.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up for today. We thank Barbara and Jay very much for their time again today and the great advice. And a lot of people have been commenting. Thank you for this very useful presentation. So we look forward to seeing you again on Friday and then the following Wednesday. So thank you everybody for joining us during your lunchtime or wherever you are in the world and whatever time it is. Thanks.
And job talks are much more leisurely.
And not recorded.
Not as fast to
And they're not recorded. Yeah,
Going-
good to remind people.
We hope to see you Friday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.